So, using the time-honoured phrase, without more ado, which I seem to have heard an awful lot today. Okay, so I'm Maggie Charles, and I'm going to be talking, like everybody has been talking about, deconstructing. But in my case, deconstructing research in BALEAP. And then asking, okay, so basically asking two things. What have we been doing, and what else might we do? Okay, so just a tiny little bit of the literature. So we'll have a brief nap. Okay, so there has been recently, there have been a lot of studies actually that are looking back over the field, different bits of the field. There are three that are worth mentioning in relation to mine. One is Riazi et al., who looked at research articles in JEEP, and that's the time period 2002 to 2019. And he found these. He's basically looking at how topics have increased or decreased over two time periods. So he finds attention to intercultural rhetoric assessment. That's something that comes up a lot, and student-produced academic discourse, or possibly that comes up also in terms of academic writing. Then there's Hyland and Zhang, and they looked at a much broader lot of literature, so 40 journals, and a longer time period, so 1980 to 2020. And they found increased attention to identity, and that's been a bit of a theme, I think, today. No, not just today, this conference, interaction and genre. And the last one I sort of popped on at the end is Ding et al. But he and his colleagues have been looking at the BALEAP discussion list. And that's, again, a different period, so 1998 to 2021. And what he found is that there's a lack of attention to the interests and concerns of practitioners. So, and that to me is completely counterintuitive, because what you would expect BALEAP practitioners to be talking about on the BALEAP discussion list is practitioner issues. Okay, so what did I do? Well, I come somewhere in the middle, and I looked at, and this is actually courtesy of Andy Gillett, who let me have his corpus really of BALEAP not presentations, but BALEAP titles of PIMs and proceedings. So I got these, and this is what I'm going to be talking about. Now, I recognise that talking about titles is not nearly as good as talking about, the abstract and the whole research article, but that information just isn't available. Okay, had it been, I would have used it. Okay, so there's been 1994 to 2019, there've been 66 meetings, 23 volumes of proceedings from 75 to 2017, that was the last one I could get hold of. Total combined titles, 1,310. So it's still a fair amount of data. It's not ideal, but I think it can start to give us some sort of an idea of what we've been doing. And mine is then this period of 1975 to 2019. Okay, so, and what I would claim is that this data is practitioner research data. So it's you and me and what we have been interested in over that time period. And that's not quite the same as Hyland and Zhang and Riazi et al., because they're looking at published research. And it's also not the same as Ding et al., because they were looking at the discussion list. So I'm somewhere in between those people. Okay, so what did I do? Well, I'm fundamentally a corpus linguist, I guess. So I made a corpus, divided it into two, or it came already divided into two, PIMs and proceedings. These are quite small corpora in corpus terms, but still, I think they can be indicative. So first of all, I made word lists, and I made corpus keywords. And keywords in corpus linguistics are, they're basically words which occur more often than would be expected by chance in comparison with the reference corpus. Okay, so it's not this. It's a specific type of keyword. So I had these word lists and keyword lists, but then of course you've got to do manual analysis to make sure that you haven't double counted titles, that you have that what you think is the topic of a title is actually correct. So you've got to do a lot of manual checking. So I read through all of these titles and the ones that came up, and I cross-checked with keywords and the word list data, and I also identified associated terms. So you might have doctoral, but if you really want to find out the amount of research on doctoral students, then you need to look also at PhD and probably also graduate as well. Okay, and then I read I ran concordances on them, and I looked again. I checked for the relevance of these, for the accuracy, and got rid of double, counting titles twice and things like that. So I had these two research questions. First of all, what were the most frequently addressed topics over the period? And to what extent have they varied over the period? So I haven't divided my period into two. Okay, I've combined everything and looked at it on that sort of scale. So I then I looked at 5 areas. So first of all, I wanted to find out what was going on in the PIMs and proceedings. I also, coming towards the top of these lists, were words like course and student. So I wanted to pick those out and find out a bit more about that. Then again, looking at these lists, the major topics, what are we actually researching? What are we talking about? And then I also wanted to highlight the communicative skills. So writing always comes towards the top of these lists, but I then went into the lists and looked specifically at speaking, reading and listening. And finally, I took several approaches to EAP, which had been highlighted by other researchers, and looked at those to see how prevalent they were in our research. So that's what it looks like, which I think is quite good. Okay, so you've got to remember that you get an enormous increase as soon as you start to have PIMs, and that's from 1994, I think. Okay, but whatever, you can see that there's been really a very clear upward trend since 1975. And this is the number of titles per year, PIMs and proceedings combined. So this is as close as we can get to looking at what research has been carried out. Now, when I looked at the most frequent topics, you can see at the top, the PIMs were it was very clear. You've got assessment has had 6 PIMs over that time, 85 papers, and in terms of the percentage of the total papers, that's 9.3%. And then you go down. So something like teacher education has had 5, that's still pretty high, and you can compare the number of papers there. You can see technology has only had 3 PIMs, but still it's making it into the top areas, if you like, 4.6% of the papers. And doing that all together, you get 44.5% coverage. So you're looking at nearly half of the papers, and half of the papers are on other stuff. Proceedings was much more difficult, and the only shared topic actually was ESP, which actually I found rather surprising. But then it was very hard to put the proceedings together into any other categories, because there were, titles like the Janus moment and, and cross-pollination and things. So really cool titles, but difficult to put in. So change and development would include things like the Janus moment, because you're looking at the past, present and future. And collaboration would include things like cross-pollination, because that was how EAP collaborated with there's then into the next layer. So the courses and students. So I couldn't show you all of the graphs, but I've given you an idea of what the trend line looks like. So it either looks stable, or it's falling, or it's rising, okay? And I've tried to give you a little sort of snapshot of that in this tabular form. Okay, so it's really nice, I think, to see that the ongoing practical focus is shown in words surrounding students and courses. And those are really high numbers. So it's, 22.7% of these titles are concerned with students. Okay, that's really good. And that's stable. And it's always been that way since 1975. Falling, now this is where it gets interesting. I was very surprised to see graduates falling, because the other researchers tend to show papers on graduates rising. Okay, but they're looking at different data. However, when I drilled down into that bit of data, and again, when you see this, it won't surprise you, there's actually been an increase in papers about the master's area, and doctoral is static. So that's the sort of thing that's happening, okay? And of course, that's probably a reflection of the huge increase in master's level courses. Okay, so when you see it, you think, oh yeah, that makes sense. Pre-accessional issues, again, it's still quite reasonable, but it is falling. Meanwhile, so early interest now decreasing. In-sessional issues seems to be ongoing and somewhat of a rise, okay? Foundation just seems to be chugging along. It's a very low level, but it is showing something of an increase. Okay, so those are the sorts of courses and students we seem to be focusing on. So what might you do? What for each of these things I've given you okay, so what might you do differently or new? And these are the Cara Syria participants. Sorry, I know I keep banging on about them. One of the things I'm going to say is that it would be really interesting to see more research on non-traditional EAP users. I was just having a really interesting conversation with someone who had done some staff-facing courses, okay? And that was my second one. And secondary level, okay? Again, that seems to go, it doesn't seem to go into EAP so much as maybe the education departments are doing more of that, but doesn't seem to be happening very much in EAP. What else? And then, non-university preaching. So like the Cara program, so sort of outreach to other non-traditional participants, maybe tutoring. Okay, so there are a lot more areas that are possibilities sort of outside the university, I think. Okay, major topics then. Again, combined data, and again, rising and falling. Okay, language, falling. Still, very high. Okay, so it's still 20%, 21%. But quite a large fall, from 40% at the beginning of our period down to 20% now. Specificity. A lot of early interest. Okay, so 4 proceedings, target specificity, 4 PIMs, but that period is 1981 and it ends in 2011. And just listening to people's talks now, people seem to be assuming the EGAP, is that right, and ESAP distinction, and just using it. So it's almost like it's no longer being discussed, but it's embedded, okay? Maybe you might disagree. Okay, so there's been a fall from 38% of papers at the beginning of the period down to 9%. So that shows you we're not really talking about it, although we do seem to be doing it. Rising assessment, yeah, that probably won't surprise anybody. Okay, so up and probably going to carry on going up. Technology, that's going to go up for sure, and was already going up, and this is pre-pandemic, pre-pandemic data. Teacher education, and that's also rising, and I think that's clearly an ongoing and important area. 5 PIMs in it, so you can see that's a lot of interest. Okay, so what else might you do? Artificial intelligence. I feel really bad saying these things because people have been saying them every day since I arrived, so I'll go over, I won't say anything more about that. The other issue that I think is something I'm very interested in is interdisciplinary issues, and that's been mentioned a couple of times, and it's really great to see that sort of coming onto the radar, because our students are being faced with interdisciplinary courses. They may well be going on to interdisciplinary courses, and that raises a whole raft of issues, both for them, for their lecturers, and I think that could well be looked into a lot more. Okay, the 4 skills: writing, speaking, reading, listening. Writing, high but falling, 25% to 16%. Speaking, rising. But interestingly, so you've got 2 PIMs, 1994, and then it's zilch until 2018. So it's as though that's having a comeback, which is, I think, nice to see, and probably will be even further. Reading, and again, the same sort of pattern. Early work, 2 PIMs, and then nothing, and then 2015. Listening is the sort of one that nobody really seems to be that interested in. And I was interested, somebody said that listening was actually the major way in which learning was taking place. So somebody actually said that at this conference, and I was sort of sitting there nodding and thinking, yeah, that could do with a bit more attention. So what might we be doing? Obviously online environments, what impact do they make in those 4 skills? But even more important, I think, is what impact do they make when you think about integrating those skills? And again, I think sometimes we're still thinking of these as discrete skills because it's sort of easier, okay? But integrating them is what students have to do, and what sort of problems, what sort of issues arise when they're doing that online, and I don't know, but it would be good to know. Okay, the approaches. I think this is my last one. Oh, not my last slide. Sorry to disappoint you, but my last chunk. Okay, so this was things that had come up as being mentioned as approaches that were typical or important in EAP. So I went through the data and looked for them. Intercultural issues. There was actually quite a lot on that recently. Proceedings and PIMs. So there has been stable and ongoing interest in that, and I think that's likely to continue. Academic literacy. Low. Okay, it's only 4.3%, but rising. Okay, and I've noticed several people talking about it. And again, it's almost as though we may not be focusing on it, but actually it's becoming incorporated, which I think is really interesting. So 1 proceedings in 2003, and then a PIM in 2018. So yeah, and it's on the rise. Corpora, low interest, but also rising. So 2003, 2014. So there have been some PIMs on it. Critical issues. So not just critical EAP, but criticality more generally. Again, low interest but rising. So it's interesting to see all of these approaches. They're not coming through right now in the data I have at the moment, but they are certainly on people's radar, and that's good. This was the one that really surprised me. There has been no proceedings or PIM on genre at all, full stop. Huh? And I almost couldn't believe this. Okay, so again, it's rising, but nobody seems to have mentioned, or very few people mention in their titles, that they're doing genre-based or anything to do with genre. And yet, it's almost something that we're doing, we're just not talking about it, and maybe not researching it, maybe not problematizing it enough. So that was the one that really surprised me. So low interest, but rising to 2.5% by the end. But, you know, that's really nothing, considering its sort of foundational importance in a lot of what we do. Okay, so approaches to EAP. What else could we do? Well, social context. And I'm getting a feeling that a lot of that is going on. And it's quite interesting, really, to come here and find people definitely incorporating attention to the social context. Whereas when I was in the States, so it's now a couple of years ago, but a lot of the presentations were like statistics, and very, very little attention to social context. So I think we could carry on with that and do it, because context is just so important, and we need to know more about it. The other thing, of course, this would be my bee in my bonnet, is data-driven learning. So using corpora in classrooms, students using corpora, corpus-based materials in classrooms. And I was trying to think about the impact of AI on that. I don't know. But I still think that discovery method, that using a corpus yourself takes you into, is very, very valuable, especially for doctoral students. And then, yeah, again, one of the missing things, one of the absences, is attention to multimodal genres and digital genres as well. Now, I'm sure that's going to increase because we're probably, I mean, I think you can start to see already, if you look at sort of recent issues of JEEP, you can see more on multimodal and digital genres. Okay, so that's why I mentioned 9 areas. Yeah, so I don't know, how's the time? I'll just run. Oh, that's it. Yeah, okay, so this is just summing up. Non-traditional EAP users, we could have more on. Non-university provision. We are still very university focused. Fair enough, that's where we came from. Artificial intelligence, interdisciplinarity, hugely important, I think. Somebody was talking about the wicked, what did she call them? The wicked questions or the wicked problems that we have to sort out, and these are interdisciplinary issues like climate change. Listening, reading, speaking and writing for online environments and integrating those skills in the online space. Exploring social context, more of it please. Data-driven learning. Again, my data suggests that that is actually static, at least in my, from my data. Other people seem to think it's on the increase. I hope so, but I'm not convinced. And multimodal and digital genres. But one thing that stands out looking at the BALEAP data is the diversity of titles. There are titles about all sorts of things that you would never ever have expected, and that is hugely valuable, and that's something, you know, we should resist being shoved into silos of doing just this or just that or just the other. And you know, let's keep that diversity, because that is, I think it's a huge advantage of BALEAP. Okay, that's it. And those are my references. Oh, and an acknowledgement to Andy Gillett, without whom you wouldn't be sitting here today.